what shocked me more, that in 1989, 14 out of 20 companies were Japanese, but that number today is down to 0. Everybody was blaming aging, but I figured aging was worse in Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Hi, today I will explain why Japan has no unicorns, why it's actually a great thing, and at the end, how Japan will be the global innovation leader in the near future. I'm going to start with a personal story. In 2012, a friend of mine and I was drinking at a bar in Kobe, and he told me that it was very difficult for Japanese professors to publish in international journals. And I said, yeah, I know, it's because of English, right? And he said, no, it's not because of English, it's because the Western theories of economics usually don't apply to Japan. I said, how come? And he said, well, in Western theories, employees usually work for a minimum amount of time for the maximum amount of payment, but this is not always true for Japan. I said, well, Japanese culture is changing, so don't worry about it. He looked me in the eye and he said, Adam, what you think is changing is lifestyles. Cultures usually don't change unless there's a traumatic event like a war or famine. But I don't remember the rest of the conversation because I was drunk. Anyway, so let's get back to the topic. Currently, there are only 8 unicorns in Japan that have the valuations of $1 billion higher. But most, if not all of their sales are generated in Japan, so they're not international. So that's why I usually say there are no international unicorns in Japan. People usually blame the IPO system because in Japan it's way easier to be listed in the stock market. But this claim is probably not true because if you look at the publicly listed startups, you usually don't find companies like Spotify or TikTok that have global presence. Another claim is it's difficult to find capital in Japan, but probably this is also not true because the world's largest fund, the Vision Fund, is headquartered in Japan. Also, Japan has one of the highest number of millionaires in the world with 3.6 million people. As a matter of fact, some of the largest ESG funds in the world are located in Japan, but 95% of their investments are overseas. And this includes the government's pension fund. So it's not true that there's no capital available in Japan. So then the question is, what's the reason? A lot of people blame the risk-avoidant culture of Japan. And the government also seems to be aware of it. And the government recently declared that it was aiming for at least 20 unicorns by year 2023. But there are 3 problems with this approach because, number 1, most unicorns all around the world are not making any money. They're actually money-losing machines. We can always make this argument they're losing money because they're using their market budget to grow, but we cannot make this argument for startups that are older than 5 years or even 10 years like Uber. And number 2, Japanese corporations and Japanese legacy companies seem to be doing worse than Japanese startups. In 1989, 14 out of top 20 global companies were Japanese, but today that number is down to 0. And number 3, Japanese culture completely goes against the culture of startups, the culture of Silicon Valley. So I analyzed many startups in Silicon Valley and Y Combinator, and I came up with these 4 patterns, which are the complete opposites of Japanese cultural values. And the first one was in Silicon Valley, rapid growth is your main focus. You only focus on the result. You only focus on rapidly growing your company and doing an IPO or M&A. But in Japan, you don't focus on the results, you focus on the process, and you always think long term. The second pattern in Silicon Valley is you always release MVP, which stands for minimum viable product. But in Japan, this is called doing things chudahampa. Incomplete things or things that have average value are usually not appreciated in this culture. Also, Japanese customers are the hardest ones to please, and so they're not going to buy an MVP so easily. Another pattern in Silicon Valley was move fast and break things, ask for forgiveness, don't ask for permission. In Japan, if you just bother others, you're not gonna get respect in the corporate world. This is not a good approach in Japan. And the fourth pattern in Silicon Valley was you have to fail. If you want to learn things, you must fail, and failing is completely normal. But in Japan, if you fail, you don't get respect again. And also, when you fall, you take down others with you. Which is a very shaming thing to do in Japan. So what this means is, by pushing the values of Silicon Valley in Japan, we're declaring war on Japanese cultural values. But on the other hand, this approach may be right. Why? Because as Clay Christensen pointed out, when corporations become larger and bigger, they become more bureaucratic and they get slower, and they often get disrupted by small startups. On the other hand, there may be multiple misunderstandings related to startups and entrepreneurship in Japan. Okay, the first myth is Japan's innovation is driven by small startups and entrepreneurs. This is a myth because when you think about the times when Japan dominated the world economy, 80s and 90s, there were not small startups that became a global player in a short time. So they were the kind of companies that were established almost a century ago when an average Japanese family had 7 children and there was so much competition in society. So to say that there were many entrepreneurs in the 80s and 90s but not today is a wrong statement. Okay, the second myth is the large corporations cannot innovate. Large corporations always get disrupted by small startups. This is also not true. A lot of people know how Steve Jobs introduced iPod, which changed the history of entrepreneurship and startups in Silicon Valley. But we know that Apple was not a small startup. Apple was a huge corporation. He just borrowed the technology from another large corporation in Japan, which was not fast enough or which did not think big. But we cannot say big corporations cannot think big. And also, we're often told that small enterprises create more jobs, but scientifically this is not backed. If you control for the age of the company, small enterprises do not necessarily create more jobs. Additionally, they usually pay 30% less. And also studies show that 50% of the jobs that are created by startups usually don't exist after 5 years. So it's a myth that we can grow the economy by just relying on small enterprises. And here's where it gets interesting. Although I personally don't think patents can measure the level of innovation, if you look at innovations in Japan, most of the patent applications are filed by the legacy companies, large Japanese corporations, not small Japanese startups. So another myth is we can drive entrepreneurship and we can change Japanese culture overnight. This is not true because I have a PhD in cultural studies and I know cultures don't change overnight. Japanese males cannot impress Japanese ladies if they are working at a small company. And the graduates from top-tier universities such as Todai, Kyodai don't want to work for small startups. Even though in the United States, a Harvard or Stanford graduate may work for a small startup if he or she gets some shares. In Japan, this is not part of the culture. And as a matter of fact, I managed a small startup in Kyoto. Even though our company was growing 500% a year, we advertised over and over, but we got almost no applicants because people don't want to move to Kyoto. People don't want to live in a small city and people don't want to work for a small startup. So this goes against culture. Another myth is startup boom in Japan is something new, something recent, but this is also not true because the government's initiative of startup support actually started 21 years ago in 2001, and one of the most important initiatives was in 2015 at Stanford University, where Prime Minister Abe met with big names from Silicon Valley, launched the Silicon Valley and Japan Bridge project. So it's not a new thing. It has been tried for more than 20 years now. Okay, the next question is then how Japan can become a global innovation leader. Japan can easily become a global innovation leader if it implements these 6 actions. These are: number 1, prioritizing intrapreneurship instead of entrepreneurship. Intrapreneurship means Japanese corporations become more innovative, more agile, more digitized, and they also get better at marketing. And secondly, Japanese government stops supporting the zombie companies. Currently, so many Japanese corporations are on the life support with the credits from the banks. This is a really bad situation for innovation because this means companies that don't innovate still continue their existence. As a matter of fact, in 2020, Japan had the lowest number of corporate bankruptcies because of the government support, which is really bad for the free market economy. Thirdly, Japan has to do some drastic changes to attract talent and foreign corporations, such as reducing the corporate tax from 38% to the level of other Asian countries or below, or opening tax-free zones. And also, instead of providing startup visas, the Japanese government should provide permanent visas to anyone who has a computer science degree from a public university. Because currently what the Japanese government is doing is no different from all the other governments, and people have no reasons to come to Japan at the moment. Also, the government has to make sure it focuses on the areas that other countries are not interested in, that require teamwork, that require laboratories, and that require long-term focus. Areas such as nuclear energy, chemistry, health technology, and so on. Instead of focusing trendy areas such as ride-sharing, ghost kitchens, or real estate sharing, the government should change its focus to strategic areas that require disruptive innovation. So I believe Japanese government will implement these soon, and I believe Japan will be an innovation leader very soon.